Hello painting friends, it's Ronnie Bringle and we're painting a color wheel of fruit. This time I would like to paint a nice red watermelon and some juicy red-violet cherries. We've done our yellow on the lemon, yellow-orange on the pear, orange for the orange, and red-orange for the apple. So this time we'll do the watermelon and the cherries, and so let's get started right away. I've done a little bit of preparation and finishing since the last time we talked. I've finished up the leaves, painted a little bit different kind of leaf on the orange, more like an orange leaf. Finished up the leaves behind the apple. I think eventually I'm going to put another leaf in here. Once I get the watermelon in place, I think I'm going to curve another leaf up onto the apple just a little bit. I've also added some leaves. I added a leaf to the stem here. I'm not quite finished with the stem on the apple yet, but I've worked some on the leaves around these cherries so that I can make sure some of those leaves will fit in under the cherry. I've also cheated just a little bit and put a little bit of a red cherry behind the watermelon tip right here. I felt that that would be easier to have that red under there and have that there waiting for me when I have the watermelon finished. So we'll start right away with the watermelon, and in this case, with these watermelon leaves that are going to curve up onto the watermelon, I'm going to go ahead and paint the full watermelon under the leaves. I'm not going to leave a space for those, and then when I have the meat of the watermelon finished, I'll put the pattern back on and paint the leaves. So we're working in our red spot on the color wheel, so I'm going to use my red color that I originally called for, and I'm going to be doing some shading with my red violet, and maybe I'll do a little highlighting with my red orange. But to start with, I'm going to use a fairly large Bringle round blender. I'll use my trusty old one that I have pretty battered up, and I'm going to use a stippling technique. So the brush is just barely damp, and I'm picking up my red, and I'm just going to go on the tip of the brush and start stippling. Now what I want to do is to create kind of a juicy look. I don't really want it to be fuzzy looking, so I have to be kind of careful here on the edge and not make a fuzzy edge, but I want it to be kind of irregular, and just maybe we'll have a little bit of bumps and dips on there instead of just a straight flat line. So before that dries though, I want to come back with another brush, and I just want to make kind of a messy looking thing where this red line cuts right through that leaf. I just want to soften that a little bit so that I don't end up with a hard red line cutting right through the middle of my leaf. So we'll just kind of smear some of that up onto the leaf and soften that line out. Okay, then I'm just going to continue with my red. And I think that in the Golden Open that I'm using, this is my Cad Red medium, and I believe with the Josonia it would be the Naphthol Crimson. So what I want to do is create something that looks multi-textured and multicolored. So I'm not going to try to cover up all that black background completely. I'm going to let some of that work for me. I've just picked up some of my red violet, and I want to introduce that now into this, and so that I can create various different values of red and different colors so that my watermelon will look juicy. So I've got my red and my red violet on my palette now, And once again, we have this problem of having already painted the apple, and now we have to try to fit that watermelon behind it. But we can come back and clean up the edge of the apple, clean up the edge of the leaf. Again, remember that if you're painting this in a logical manner, you would have had this watermelon already finished before you painted your apple. But we're trying to just go around the color wheel, and so I'm just making some adjustments. So this watermelon is probably the easiest part of this whole thing because it just goes on here pretty easily. And I don't want to stipple too firmly and create a fuzzy look. I just want to kind of create this juicy look, and so I'm using quite a bit of paint on my brush and tapping at it kind of gently. I'll probably give a second coat once that's dry. I'm going to wash my brush, and I'm going to move down to a little bit smaller brush. It's the same round Bringle blender. And I want to pick up my smoked pearl with the Josonia or Titan buff with the golden open. And I'm putting this kind of on the tip of the brush and flattening that tip out just a little bit so that I can get, I want to get right out here almost to the edge, and all I want to do is just stipple this on and blot my brush frequently. While the red paint is wet, I can't do too much stippling of the white into the red, but I can get my first layer on here, and I'm just gently pulling it up into the red, trying not to create too much pink. But we'll just get this white started and then let that second coat cover up anything that turns pink in here. I've got a little bit of a pattern adjustment I'm making on this spot right in here. I want to curve that melon out just a little bit more. And I'm going to dry that part before we go on. I'm going to start now, this time with my white color, and while my red is still still dry, and stipple the white area of the watermelon and blend that softly up into the red. We do have to make sure that those two colors blend together, but we want to create as little pink as possible. So I'm just going to take that white kind of up onto the red, and I'm just going to make sure I give myself enough of the white so that I can blend the red into it when it comes time to blend the red. Now I want to take my red again and do just another light coat. We don't need very much because we've got some good texture showing already. So I don't want to do away with all the dark and light of the red. I'll kind of spiff it up here. And that's on that leaf right there, so I don't need to worry too much about that. Clean up anything that looks too fuzzy on the edge. And now I'm back into my red violet, and I'll add a little bit of red violet. So I'm just going back and forth until I create something that looks kind of like that dark and light red of a watermelon. Okay, we'll dry that and continue on. I've gone back and forth now a couple times on my watermelon with my red and my red violet and my white, my Titan Buff. I've kind of tickled these back and forth a couple of times till I get that nice look of the red and the white blending together with just a slight little tinge of pink right where they meet. And then I've also painted the skin of the watermelon all around this edge here. I've painted with my green, the green that we mixed. So now I just want to give this watermelon a little more, make it a little more lively. So I'm going to move to my red orange. We've got our red on there, but I'm going to add just a little bit of a lighter value, especially facing the light source. Just put in a little bit lighter value in with my red orange. And I don't want to make this solid. I'm just going to kind of randomly stipple it in and let it be a little bit kind of juicy. Once my red orange is dry, then I want to introduce just a little bit of white into the meat of the watermelon. Some watermelon is very, very red. Some has a little tiny bit of white in it, and I think it kind of makes it look, I don't know, kind of refreshing maybe, or juicy, to add just this a little tiny bit of white, like where the center of the watermelon would be. So we'll just put a little bit in there. I want to make sure I blot my brush really well so that I can kind of just tickle that around. If that gets to be a little too milky or chalky looking, then I could always pick up a little bit of my red orange and tap back into that. So you can kind of sometimes have to play around with that until it looks just right. Now I want to put some seeds in the watermelon. So first of all, I want to make some little seed pockets. So I'm going to take a small brush, like a 2 blender or maybe a spotter, and I don't want to go too dark, so I'm going to pick up my red violet with some red. So now I have kind of a mix of those two. So I don't want to go to straight red violet because that's going to be a little bit too dark. And with the tip of my little blender, I'm just going to set down a little pocket that is hard on one edge and then just kind of blends away on the other edge. So if the light source is kind of towards the center, then the edge of this little pocket would throw a shadow, and so we're putting the hard edge more or less towards the center and letting it blend. So I think you get the idea of that. Then with my liner brush, I'm just going to take some black and paint some seeds. So we can paint some seeds that are maybe just on edge. So maybe you just paint a little, almost like a little line there. And some seeds could be showing the whole flat part of the seed. So they'll sit right in the little seed pocket. And they can be big or they can be small. This is not a seedless watermelon, so we're painting some black seeds in there. Then I'm just going to blot my brush. I still have a little bit of black in there, even though I did wash it, but I didn't wash it very well. So I don't want to go with straight white. I've got a little bit of black, so I've got like a gray, a really light gray color. And then I just want to put my little highlight on each one of those seeds. Now for the skin, I'm going to take some of my blue-green and I'm going to just dry brush with my liner to put some shading over here where it's sitting underneath that leaf. And just use some of my yellow-green to put a little highlight on here. So maybe up in this corner we'd see a little highlight on that skin. Kind of skipping around. And then there's one more thing I want to do, and that is I want to see just the slightest little bit of green happening on the white part of the melon. So a lot of times when you cut into that skin, you can see that the color of the skin kind of just a little tiny bit can bleed onto the white. So I'm just whisking. I've got a tiny little bit of water in my brush and my green, the green that we mixed, and I'm just tinting ever so slightly the right up next to the green skin on the white. So now once I get all the rest of those seeds in and I get my leaves in there, that's going to look like a nice juicy piece of watermelon. So we'll move on to our red-violet spot now, right next to the red. And the first thing I'm going to do is just simply paint in, there's a cherry hidden way back here in the back. And so I can kind of add some darkening and lightening to this later on, but I'd like to just get some dark color in there to start with. And then I'm going to use either, I can use a round blender or I can use a small tiny little oval blender, so it's kind of pick and choose whichever you like best. I'm going to use my red color for the light value on the cherries, and I'm going to use the red-violet for the basic color, and then I'm going to pick up a little bit of violet for my dark value. So I think maybe it'll help if I zoom in just a little bit so that you can see what's going on. We'll go just a little bit more. There. Okay, so I've got my red, I've got my little oval blender, and I'm going to tap this red right where I want it. So I know I want to have a shine here on the fat part. It's almost kind of like painting the apple, except we're not going to streak so much. So now I've got my red-violet. We want to create the red-violet color in this area, so that's what we want to use the most of. There are a number of steps to cherries. The first step is just getting color on and getting it somewhat blended. Then we have to go back and enhance, just like we have on all the other fruit items. So I'm just blending my red into my red-violet. Normally then I would turn my work so that I could pull this, put this paint right up on the edge of the cherry. And just kind of tickle, be sure to blot your brush between colors and tickle those together. So that will be the first layer of red and red-violet on our cherries. Once you've got some color on there, then it's going to start making more sense. You'll be able to build up the layers a little bit better. Now what I would do on the cherries with the red-violet and the red, I would make sure to blot your brush between colors. As you pick up one color, blot your brush a little bit from the previous color, because the red-violet will soon just take over everything. So you'll want to blot your brush, and when you blend your colors together, make sure you blot your brush before you start to blend, and also blot your brush every now and then if the red violet begins to get too out of control. So you can see a couple of different cherries here now. I've got, you can't see very much of the detail until you get a couple of layers on. So far I'm just only working with the red violet and the red. Just takes a little while to get enough layers of color on. These are the kind of cherries my husband really likes. These, I think they're called Bing cherries, and they get very dark red and juicy and delicious. And we'll give them all little red throats where the stem grows out. And I'm just using my oval and kind of dabbing around, creating the detail that I want to show. So if I lose that little throat, then I have to come back and put it back in with some red. Now remember, we want the cherries to be dark red, so the red color is only the highlight. It will only be the light part of the cherry. Most of the cherry will be the red violet. So I've got 4 or 5 layers now of red and red violet on my cherries. So the next thing I would do would be to pick up some of my violet color, and that is going to be a little bit darker, so I can use that as my shading color. So looking on the opposite side of where my light is coming, I'm going to just work in some of this darker value kind of around the curve that's looking away from the light. And once you have all of that in place, you might have to go back and do your red again and work with it just a little bit more. Anything worth doing is worth doing several times, I always say, so you can get it just up to where you want it. I went into my hidden cherries and I added just the tiniest little bit of my red in those hidden cherries. And now I'm just adding a little bit of my violet to darken them down. And I'd probably play around with these for a little while. I want to mix. If you don't want to put your red on the edge of your berries, but the top berry is getting lost because the edge doesn't show, then you could mix some of your red violet with your red instead of using straight red, just to create as many values as possible. So once you have your berries, your cherries, all nice and red and juicy looking, then it comes time to put the highlight on there. And cherries are a little bit reflective when they're all washed and ready to eat. So we'll put a little bit of a hard highlight on the cherries, and I want to put that kind of where the fat part of the cherry is going to catch the light. So I'm using my small brown blender, or you could use a spotter, and I'm just going to tap on a hard little highlight on these cherries where they catch the light. And then those are ready for their stems, and they're ready to be eaten. Now one thing as I'm painting, I'm noticing that now that I have my cherries done, my watermelon is looking just a little bit too much in the red-violet space. So I'm going to take my stippling brush and I'm going to put some red back into my watermelon. I talked a little bit about relationships and how you can only tell what one color looks like by putting it next to another color. So once I got that red-violet in the cherries, then I could see that my watermelon, in order to take this place, the place of the red color on a color wheel, in order to take that place, it has to have just a little more look of red rather than so much of the red-violet. So I'm just coming back and selectively adding some red to my watermelon, and I kind of am now satisfied with the way that looks. So then I would come back and I need to clean up the edge of my apple here. I need to put some of my red-orange and maybe a little bit of orange along the edge of my apple to bring it up off of the watermelon. And the other thing I wanted to point out to you is that as I'm going along and painting my leaves, I'm kind of adding little hints of color in the leaves that are in that color spot on the color wheel. So for instance, in this area here, I've got some oranges in the leaves. I'm moving into adding reds in here. Over here I've got some more of my yellow orange in there. As I'm coming down into my violet color, I've started adding a little bit of violet into these leaves. So that's just kind of a fun thing I thought I would do, is just to add a little bit of the color wheel colors in the leaves along with painting those colors just on the fruits. So that completes now the watermelon, the red spot, and the cherries in the red-violet spot. Next we'll do violet and blue-violet, and maybe we'll even do the blue. I'll see how. I'm not sure if I'm going to paint a plum here or if I'm going to do something else, but we'll see next time. Until then, have fun painting those cherries.